The projection screen still glowed with my findings when they all stood in unison. 9 executives, their faces contorted with a mixture of anger and disdain, pushed back their chairs simultaneously as if orchestrated. My voice died mid-sentence about the alarming quality failures I had uncovered in our primary manufacturing division. "We are done listening to his failures," Stuart Gable, the chief operating officer, announced to the room. His voice carried that particular, grating timbre of someone who believed himself completely untouchable. "This presentation is a waste of valuable time, and we have more pressing matters requiring our attention." The rustle of expensive suits filled the room as they gathered their leather portfolios and tablet computers. No one looked at me, no one spoke. The methodical way they ignored my presence felt calculated to maximize the humiliation, a silent agreement to erase me from the room. "The numbers speak for themselves," I said, struggling to maintain a calm, professional composure. "Our customers are facing genuine risks, and we cannot ignore these reports." "Our customers are perfectly satisfied with our products," interrupted Diana Thorne, the vice president of operations. Her polite smile never wavered as she added, "Perhaps you should consider whether you are suited for this level of corporate responsibility." They moved toward the exit in a tight cluster, chatting about their lunch plans. The sound of their expensive leather shoes against the polished floor seemed unreasonably loud in the sudden silence of the boardroom. 9 executives, the entire leadership team of the company, walking out while I stood there, my hand still raised toward the projection screen that showed indisputable evidence of their negligence. Howard Finch, the chief financial officer, was the last to leave the room. He paused at the doorway, his hand hovering near the light switch. "Don't bother finishing this report. No one will ever read it, and no one cares about your concerns." He flicked the lights off, leaving me in semi-darkness, illuminated only by my damning presentation slide. 45 seconds passed in that dimmed room. My heartbeat slowed from a racing panic to something steadier, colder, and far more focused. The betrayal crystallized into something harder, something actionable. I had anticipated this exact reaction, had practically counted on it. The public rejection was merely confirmation of everything I had suspected for months. I pulled out my mobile phone, scrolled to a contact I had saved weeks ago, but hoped I would not need to use, and pressed call. When she answered, I spoke 6 words that would change the trajectory of the entire company. "They did exactly what you predicted." A brief pause followed. "All of them?" asked the voice on the other end, calm and measured. "Every single one," I replied, "and the entire walkout is recorded on the boardroom system." Another pause, followed by the sound of papers rustling. "Give me 3 hours." I ended the call and sat back in my chair, staring at the data still projected on the screen. The quality failures, the deliberate cover-ups, the altered test results, everything they did not want anyone outside these walls to see. My name is Walter Vance. Until 5 months ago, I was the quality assurance director at one of the country's leading industrial equipment manufacturers. Our products were installed in hospitals, schools, and government facilities nationwide. We made the kind of heavy-duty equipment that people trusted with their safety without a second thought. I was not always the person who made powerful enemies. Growing up in a small, struggling industrial town, I learned early that systems had flaws. But honesty mattered above all else. My father worked 24 years at the local manufacturing plant, coming home with stories about corners cut and safety warnings ignored by management. When that plant closed after a preventable industrial accident that injured several workers, I promised myself I would never stay silent if people's lives were at risk. My reputation in the industry was built on thoroughness and integrity. I had spent over 2 decades fixing broken systems and improving safety protocols without damaging the companies that I served. I was known as someone who found solutions, not someone who created problems. That was why they recruited me. "We need someone with your high standards and integrity," Stuart Gable had said during my final interview, his smile warm and convincing. "Minor inefficiencies have crept into our processes. Fresh eyes, that is all we need to get back on track." My predecessor, Bernard Hughes, had left suddenly. Health issues, they claimed. His quality team seemed oddly reluctant to discuss him. When I asked about his documentation, I received vague responses about his unique archiving system that had not been properly transferred before his departure. The first warning sign came during my facility tour. Clara Beck, a quality technician with 6 years at the company, showed me around with mechanical precision. Her answers felt rehearsed, almost scripted, until we reached the main testing lab. When I asked about their validation protocols, her eyes darted toward a small security camera in the corner before she answered. "We follow established company procedures," she said, her voice tight and barely audible. Later that week, I found testing results that did not match the manufacturing outputs. Equipment that had failed critical safety checks was being shipped with approval signatures. When I brought this to my team, they stared at their hands, silent and afraid. "Just follow the established protocols," Stuart Gable instructed when I requested a private meeting. Previous leadership complicated things unnecessarily. The next day, a bonus notification appeared in my company account, which was substantially more than my contracted amount. No explanation was provided. I declined the bonus and continued investigating. The patterns of corruption within the quality assurance department became clearer with each passing day. Our flagship medical ventilator line, which was currently in use in over 200 hospitals across the country, had critical software and safety flaws that were being deliberately and systematically concealed from federal regulators. Testing protocols had been modified to hide defects, and customer complaints about failing devices were being redirected to internal servers and buried under piles of bureaucratic jargon. When I presented my initial findings privately to Diana Thorne, she did not look surprised. Instead, she adjusted her glasses, looked out her window at the city skyline, and explained that every major industry has acceptable margins of error, and the issue was not with the product, but with user expectations. I countered that we could not accept margins of error when those errors could harm patients in hospitals. In response, she slid a blue folder across her desk. Inside was a revised employment contract offering a substantial salary increase of $40,000 and an unusual confidentiality clause that would restrict me from discussing quality issues outside the company. She told me that everyone benefits from regulatory flexibility and that they reward team players very generously. She tapped the signature line with her pen, expecting me to sign on the spot. I took the folder, told her I would consider it, and continued gathering evidence. That night, I received an anonymous email containing several older safety reports that had been altered in our official archives. The sender's message was simple and chilling, stating that my predecessor, Bernard Hughes, was not sick and that I should look into his sudden departure. The morning of my presentation to the executive team, I found Clara Beck waiting by my car in the dimly lit parking garage. She was constantly checking over her shoulder, her hands trembling. She whispered that they were setting me up and that Stuart Gable already had my termination paperwork prepared and signed. She explained that they had told everyone my report was an attention-seeking exaggeration. When I asked why she was telling me this, she said that Bernard Hughes had tried to do the right thing too, and did not deserve what happened to him. She walked away before I could ask more, but the haunted look in her eyes, the same look I had seen in my entire quality assurance team, solidified my resolve. I returned to my office and made one crucial modification to my presentation before the meeting, removing one slide that contained the most damning financial and testing evidence, saving it for another purpose. After the executives abandoned the meeting room and left me in the dark, I sat alone. The call I made was to Julia Cole, the lead investigator at the Federal Regulatory Agency. She had been quietly building a case against the company for several months. I told her I had sent her everything from that day's presentation, that the walkout had occurred almost exactly as we had predicted. I added that they had made comments on the record about handling it like the Detroit incident. Her voice was measured and professional as she confirmed that Howard Finch had specifically mentioned handling it like Detroit when discussing the suppressed incident reports. She told me that this connected the final dots they needed and instructed me to stay where I was and act normal if anyone returned. For 5 months, I had been building this case while they thought they were breaking me down. The first time I contacted Julia Cole was not planned. I had found her contact details buried in correspondence my predecessor, Bernard, had hidden in encrypted folders on a secure server. Bernard had not left for health reasons. He had been systematically documenting the same safety issues I had discovered. His final report had vanished from the company database on the day of his sudden departure. When I first reached out to Julia, she was cautious, explaining that Bernard had stopped responding to her inquiries 3 months before his departure, and the company had claimed he was unavailable due to medical leave. I told her he was not sick, at least not according to his wife, whom I had tracked down. She told me Bernard had taken a massive settlement with a strict gag order after being threatened with manufactured fraud charges that would have ruined his career. Our collaboration began that night. We met in a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city, away from corporate eyes. We knew a frontal assault would not work against the corporate structure. The executives had covered their tracks too carefully, with armies of corporate attorneys ready to bury any accusation under years of litigation. We needed them to incriminate themselves on the record, to show their willful disregard for safety. I agreed to continue my internal investigation, documenting every conversation, every modified test, and every pressure tactic they used. Over the next 12 weeks, I became a ghost in my own office, nodding at their suggestions and quietly downloading raw test data to encrypted flash drives. We compiled evidence of over 40 separate incidents where safety alarms on the ventilator line had failed during testing, yet the units were marked as passed. The walkout at the board presentation was the final trap. We knew that when confronted with the full extent of the data in front of their peers, their arrogance would drive them to shut down the meeting rather than address the truth. That recorded walkout would serve as the ultimate proof of their active cover-up. After leaving the meeting room, I walked through the empty, quiet hallways back to my office. The silence felt weighted now, expectant and heavy with anticipation. I checked my watch, knowing there were about 2 hours until Julia Cole's team would make their move. When I reached my office, I found the door slightly open. Inside, sitting comfortably in my leather chair, was Diana Thorne. "That was quite a spectacle you created in the boardrooms," she said, turning my computer monitor toward her with a flick of her wrist. "Though, it is not surprising given your combative approach." I set my presentation folders down on the desk. "Was there something else you wanted to say that you could not share with the group?" She smiled, that cold, corporate smile of hers that never showed any teeth. "You know, Walter, I actually argued for hiring you. Your reputation for fixing difficult problems impressed me, but you misunderstood your assignment from the beginning, which was to fix the public perception problem, not to create a new one." She stood up, smoothing her skirt with both hands. "Your position as Quality Assurance Director has been terminated, effective immediately. Security will collect you in 15 minutes to escort you from the property. Whatever materials you have gathered stay in this room." I looked at her, keeping my voice neutral. "Does that include my personal notes and research?" Her eyes narrowed slightly as she replied, "Everything. The company owns all work product created during your employment here." "I understand," I said, nodding slowly. Something in my calm acceptance must have made her suspicious. "This is not a negotiation, Walter," she warned, stepping closer. "You have made enemies of people who do not forget, people with substantial influence across the entire industry." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is reality," she said, moving toward the door. "Your career ended the moment you decided to go against this team. Though I respect your principles, misguided as they are, principles are not worth much compared to the unanimous opinion of 9 executives." I paused and said, "Let us see how those opinions hold up." She did not reply, only gave a sharp nod before walking out into the corridor. After she left, I sat at my desk and pulled open the bottom drawer. Taped to the underside was a small, black audio device that had been recording every conversation in my office for the past 12 weeks. I checked the indicator light, saw it was still recording, and slipped it into my suit pocket. Just as I did, my phone buzzed with a text message from Julia Cole. "We are ahead of schedule. 4 agents arriving now. Meet us in the lobby in 10 minutes." I gathered my personal items, just a notebook and my keys, enough to appear compliant without raising suspicion. As I walked through the department, my quality assurance team watched me go, with expressions ranging from pity to fear. Some knew what was coming. Others thought they were witnessing my final departure in disgrace. Clara Beck caught up with me near the elevator bank. "They are saying you tried to blame the production team for design flaws," she whispered, looking around nervously. "Stewart is already announcing your replacement to the staff." "Are they?" I pressed the down button. Interesting timing. "What will you do now, Walter?" Her voice trembled. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. "Sometimes," I said, stepping inside the car, "you have to let people believe they have won before they realize they have already lost." The lobby was bustling with afternoon activity when the glass doors swung open. 4 individuals in dark suits entered, led by Julia Cole herself. Her regulatory badge was already visible as she approached the reception desk. "Regulatory Enforcement Division," she announced, her voice carrying across the high-ceilinged marble lobby. "We have a warrant to access specific company records and conduct immediate interviews." The security guard looked panicked, his fingers fumbling as he reached for his phone. Within minutes, the lobby transformed into carefully controlled chaos. Employees stopped to watch, whispering. Phones came out, and a representative from the legal department rushed down the stairs, demanding to see the paperwork. I stood near the reception desk, observing as Julia's team handed over the search warrant and explained the situation with clinical precision. Her agents dispersed toward the elevators, accompanied by thoroughly unsettled legal representatives. Stuart Gable appeared from the executive elevator, red-faced and hissing instructions to a junior attorney who looked increasingly alarmed. When Stuart spotted me, his expression transformed from anger to calculating suspicion. He strode over, positioning himself to block my view. "I hope you understand what you have done," he said quietly. "This little tantrum will destroy more than just your career." "That sounds concerning," I replied. "Maybe you should share those thoughts with the agents upstairs." His face tightened. "You signed confidentiality agreements." "Anything I have shared was provided through proper regulatory channels," I finished for him. "Nothing outside standard reporting requirements." The color drained from his face. I had not leaked anything to the press. I had simply followed the mandatory reporting protocols they had been circumventing for years. "You have no idea what forces you are playing with," he said. "This company has survived worse than one disgruntled employee." I smiled, maintaining eye contact. "I am not disgruntled, Stuart. I am doing exactly what you hired me to do, ensuring quality standards are met." Something in my expression must have unsettled him because he stepped back slightly. "Security will escort you out now." "Actually," said Julia Cole, stepping up behind him, "Mr. Walter will be staying to assist our investigation. We have some questions about the presentation that was interrupted earlier today." The next 3 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. Regulatory agents in dark windbreakers moved through the building, carrying blue plastic crates to secure physical files, locking down central databases, and confiscating quality control documentation. The server room was occupied by IT specialists from the agency who systematically copied backup files. Executives who had walked out of my presentation just hours ago were now isolated in separate offices, prevented from communicating with each other or accessing their devices. Employees watched with wide eyes, gathered in small groups in the hallways, whispering as years of careful deception and corporate cover-ups began unraveling in real time. I sat in a small glass conference room, answering questions and providing technical context as Julia Cole's team built their case file. Through the glass, I could see the growing realizations spreading across the executive floor. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Howard Finch, our chief financial officer, was escorted from his office, ashen-faced and silent. By 4:15, 6 more executives followed, not in handcuffs, but clearly no longer in control of the company or their own destinies. As they passed the conference room where I sat, Stuart Gable locked eyes with me. The recognition flickering across his face, the sudden understanding that the man they had dismissed and tried to humiliate had systematically dismantled their entire operation, was worth every moment of anxiety. But this was only the beginning of their downfall. The next morning arrived with a surreal brightness. I dressed methodically in a dark charcoal gray suit, a white cotton shirt, and a dark blue tie. Today was about watching accountability unfold. My 5 months of careful documentation and deliberate patience were about to culminate in the emergency board meeting, scheduled for 8 in the morning. The headquarters looked vulnerable. In the early light, security had been increased, with unfamiliar guards checking identification badges at every entrance. 2 news vans already waited at the perimeter of the property, their satellite dishes raised, and local journalists stood near the gates with cameras ready. Brenda Stark, an assistant I recognized from the executive suite, greeted me at the elevator. "I am Brenda, assistant to the board chair," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You are expected upstairs immediately." The executive floor was eerily quiet. The glass offices that usually bustled with activity stood empty, their occupants notably absent. Brenda led me to a side room adjacent to the main boardroom. Through the partially open door I could see the board members gathering, their faces somber as they spoke in urgent whispers. On the table, silver trays of pastries and pots of hot coffee remained completely untouched, going cold in the tense atmosphere. "Wait here," Brenda instructed. "The chair will call you in when they are ready." Alone in the room, I checked my mobile phone. I had a message from Julia Cole, informing me that the second phase was proceeding and that 6 search warrants were being executed simultaneously at the executive's private residences. I smiled, realizing the timing was perfect. From the boardroom, the voices grew louder and more tense. Someone was demanding immediate answers, while another insisted on waiting for external legal representation. A firm, authoritative voice cut through the noise, calling the meeting to order. It was Gerald Pierce, the board chair. "We face unprecedented allegations that require immediate action," he announced. The door swung open and Gerald, a silver-haired man with sharp, calculating eyes, nodded in my direction. "Please join us. Walter." The boardroom contained 16 people, including the full 8-person board, several senior managers who had not been part of yesterday's walkout, and a cluster of grave-faced corporate attorneys. The 2 empty chairs at the long mahogany table were highly conspicuous. "For those who have not met him, this is Walter Vance, our Quality Assurance Director," Gerald Pierce said. "Or rather, our former director, according to termination papers that were apparently filed yesterday afternoon, papers that I never approved or signed." Murmurs rippled across the room as Gerald continued, explaining that I had agreed to present my findings directly to the board before speaking with federal investigators later that afternoon. Stuart Gable, who sat rigid near the far end of the table, interrupted, claiming this was highly irregular and that their attorneys should review any materials first. "You forfeited that privilege," Gerald Pierce cut in sharply. "The regulators have already seized most of our records. We are trying to understand what is happening before the stock markets open and this company loses half its value." He nodded toward me, signaling that the floor was mine. I connected my tablet computer to the presentation screen, and the room darkened as the monitors illuminated with the same slides I had started showing the previous day. As I began explaining yesterday, before the executive team departed, I said, "Our quality assurance protocols have been systematically compromised, for approximately 48 months. For the next 40 minutes, I methodically laid out everything I had discovered during my investigation. I showed the board members comparative data of altered software outputs, modified safety testing parameters, and suppressed failure logs. I displayed communications proving deliberate concealment of ventilator equipment failures, including 4 specific cases that had resulted in severe patient injuries at hospitals." The board members' expressions shifted from initial skepticism to quiet shock and finally to barely contained fury. "This cannot be accurate," Diana Thorne insisted when I paused to let the data sink in. "These are isolated incidents being presented out of context." "Actually," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level, "I have not even shown you the most concerning evidence." I switched to a new set of slides, the ones I had withheld from the executive team yesterday. The screens displayed financial records showing patterns of suspicious offshore payments following regulatory inspections, tracing diagrams linking executive bonuses to falsified quality metrics, and email chains discussing strategies to discredit potential whistleblowers. "Where did you get these documents?" Howard Finch demanded, his voice hoarse and trembling. "They came from my predecessor, Bernard Hughes, I replied. Before he was forced out, he created secure backups of the raw databases. He anticipated being silenced, and he wanted to make sure the truth survived. I turned back to the board. Bernard did not leave because of health issues. He left because he was given a choice to sign a settlement with a gag clause or face manufactured fraud charges. His final act was encrypting these files, with instructions that they be sent to federal authorities if he did not reset a digital timer. That is theft of proprietary company property, one of the corporate attorneys interjected, leaning forward. Gerald Pierce raised his hand for silence. Let him continue, he commanded. I clicked to the next slide. Video footage from my presentation the previous appeared on the screens, capturing the moment the executive team walked out, including their disparaging comments. The crystal-clear audio brought a painful silence to the room. You recorded that meeting illegally, Stuart Gable snapped, slamming his fist on the table. Actually, I countered, all boardroom meetings in this building are automatically recorded for archival purposes, as explicitly stated in the company policy manual under Section 5.2. I simply requested access to those archives this morning, which Gerald Pierce approved. Stuart looked at Gerald, but the board chair's face remained blank. I continued, explaining that federal agents were currently executing search warrants at 6 executives' homes, looking specifically for communications about the Detroit incident from 2 years ago, where equipment failure in a hospital operating room was falsely blamed on user error. The color drained from several faces around the table as they realized the scale of the investigation. For the next hour, the meeting devolved into chaotic crisis management. External counsel was called, public relations firms were contacted, and financial advisors were summoned. Through it all, I sat quietly, watching their world collapse in slow motion. By noon, trading of the company stock had been temporarily suspended. By 2 in the afternoon, 9 resignation letters had been submitted to the board. By 4 o'clock, federal prosecutors announced preliminary charges against 5 executives, with more indictments expected. As the day wound down, Gerald Pierce asked me to stay behind. You have been planning this for months, he said, once we were alone in the boardroom. From the 3rd week of my employment, I confirmed. Once I understood what was happening, I had to choose between becoming complicit or bringing it all down. You could have come to me directly, he suggested. I studied him carefully. Could I? 3 board members were aware of these safety issues, Gerald. Their signatures appear on approval documents for the modified testing protocols. He had the grace to look discomfited. Not all of us knew the extent of the cover-up. Ignorance by choice is still a choice, I replied. He nodded slowly, accepting the rebuke. What happens now? That depends on you, I said. The company can survive this, but not with the same leadership structure. My resignation will be on your desk tomorrow. My work here is finished. The next morning, I watched from my apartment as news channels displayed footage of executives being escorted from their homes. The company's stock had dropped 55% at opening. Class action lawsuits were being assembled by consumer advocacy groups. But this had never been about personal revenge. It was justice for the patients harmed by faulty equipment and for the employees threatened into silence. My phone rang, displaying a number I did not recognize. Is this Walter Vance? Asked an unfamiliar voice. It is, I replied. This is Dr. Gibson at Memorial Hospital. We have been following the news, and our safety board would like to discuss a potential consulting position with you to help identify compromised equipment in our facilities. Would you be interested? I smiled. Very much so. Sometimes, the best revenge is using their destruction to build something better. If you have made it to the end of this journey with me, I cannot thank you enough for listening. The courage to stand up against powerful forces comes from knowing others understand your story. Please consider hitting that like button if this resonated with you. And subscribe for more true accounts of corporate justice. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. There is strength in our shared stories. Until next time, remember that no amount of power can withstand the weight of truth when it finally breaks free.